of you, and welcome to day 5 at the Bank of Baroda Batak. Now, for our first session that's been curated, session number 157 in your program sheets, Beginnings and Endings, it gives me great pleasure to announce the speakers. Anjum Hasan's books have been nominated for the Man Asian Literary Prize, the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature, the Hindu Best Fiction Award, and the Crossword Fiction Award. Sean Greer is the New York Times best-selling author of 6 works of fiction, including the 2018 Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, Less. Jayant Kaikini is a Kannada writer, poet, playwright, and lyricist. He's published 20 books, including the most recent, No Presents Please, Mumbai Stories. Mahesh Rao's short fiction has been shortlisted for various awards, including the Commonwealth Short Story Prize, 1.2 billion, his collection of short stories, and Polite Society have been published to critical acclaim. Our moderator for the evening, Paul McVeigh, winner of the McVeigh Literary Prize and the Polari First Novel Prize, will be in conversation with the speakers. Please join me with a big round of applause to welcome the speakers.
Hello there. Are you, hello? Ah, there, thank you. Oh, yeah, so you're live, just in case you were cardboard cutouts or something. I'd like to welcome you all here today. We're here to talk about short stories and specifically beginnings and endings, but we've also got some novelists here as well, so they'll be talking about it from both perspectives. And I'm going to start with this chap on my left. And one of the things, in the last couple of years, I've been judging a lot of short story competitions. And I've spoken to a lot of judges and asked their advice when I was starting out as a judge. And all of them agreed that when they read through these piles of short stories, that they knew the winner, if not from the first page, but from the first paragraph. And I just wondered, do you know why that is? What is it in that first paragraph, that first page, that would make a judge go, this is it? What do you think?
Well, I know from my experience judging contests like these that it feels the same way, which feels so unfair to writers who are better at endings, like me, honestly. I'm not good at beginnings. Or even middles. That's another part of a novel to be good at. But what strikes you when you read so many books, I don't know if you guys find the same thing, is they sound the same. Often they have the same voice, and then someone bursts out with a totally different voice, and you're like, well, this is one of them, and you can tell when you read so many. And sometimes, even great authors with minor books, you can tell it's that author, and I could see why they're great.
I was talking to an Australian short story writer, Kate Kennedy, recently. She was saying that the opening has to have some sort of mystery. Would you agree? Something that draws people and makes them want to keep... basically, I think, what is it that makes them want to turn that page onto the second page and not put it down and choose another story or another book?
Well, ideally, for me, at the beginning of the book, I try to, because they don't know any of the names, they don't know what to expect at all, I can actually try to tell them the entire plot of the novel without their knowing. So you say something like, a king dethroned, a city on fire, a woman flown into the skies, but let's begin with a little boy. And you're like, where are we? We're promised these few things, and they've told you the end of the novel, you don't even know it, so that when you get to the end, you're like, oh, she really did set the city on fire. Great,
And what are your thoughts on it, Anjum?
Since we're talking, you mentioned short stories. When you talked about the Australian writer who feels that it's often needed that in the beginning of the story you have something of a sense of a mystery. I think I feel the opposite in some way, especially with short stories, to make a distinction between novels and short stories, because I think often I'm starting medias res, what they call medias res, midway. So you are trying to create a sense in that first paragraph or that first page that actually a lot has already happened. and you are catching this character or this story midway somehow. And that idea of the short story being a glimpse of something, being a fragment of something, that interests me very much. You are never going to be able to tell the whole plot in the first paragraph. You're not going to be able to tell the whole story in the whole story either. So can you lure in the reader by creating a sense of interest in something which you are seeing midway? That to me is the tricky thing. And the other point that you made about why is it that the first paragraph or the first page needs to pull in the reader? Why is that so important? I think it's the word you used, Andrew, which is voice. It's not so much the information that is being given as the style that is being used. That is what I think in my book is what pulls you in. Because 6 people may be giving you the same information, but there will be that one voice that stands out. So it's the style, it's the quality of the prose, it's the voice, not so much the plot for me.
You mean
It's the storytelling. I mean, it's to find a storyteller.
The great Raymond Carver, the American short story writer, he says, you know, you need to start as late as you possibly can in the story and also get out as early as you can as well. What are your thoughts, Jayant?
Hello, namaste. See, there are different ways of looking at it. You know, like I was just chatting with you all before I came here. Some writers, some of my friends, they know the story already, and they write it then. My problem is if I know the story already, why should I write at all? There's a writer in Kannada, Yashwant Chittal, one of the phenomenal writers. He always says, I don't write what I know, I write to know.
Yes.
So for me, short story is a mode of thought, mode of knowing. So the unknown next sentence is the most exciting thing about me. I don't know what is the next line coming. So for me, the first striking image, one incident, one scene, that is it. I mean, there is no plan behind it. Once it starts, it sets the tone. Like in Indian music, we have ragas. This rag, Yaman rag, that rag. You know the first alap. You know what is this rag about. Same way, the story sets its tone in its first opening paragraphs.
Yeah,
And that carries you. You know, like you get lost. So I have to get lost to find the story.
And what you're saying just resonates with me. It just reminds me, because I do tend to write in my head, and then, you know, over a period of time, and then when I come down to sit down to write it, you know, someone will say, how long did it take you to write that? I'd say, well, it took an afternoon, or 20 years, depending on how long I spent with it in my head. But one thing that I had to learn not to do was tell someone what I was working on. Because someone would say to me, we've got this, and I say, well, I've just got one thing left I need, but it's this story that happens. And as soon as I told it, I didn't want to write it. You know, so I had to keep it in. Mahesh, how do you find beginnings? And
well, we've all mentioned the in media res, and I think this is something that's kind of become quite fashionable, particularly through teaching and writing tips, the flood of writing tips that people send round. And there is this notion that you have to grab this reader, that readers are inattentive, that they're almost there because, you know, there are other distractions and you need to keep them there, you know. But I really do like a quiet beginning. I mean, when I've judged short stories, the quality that really leaps out, and there's no other word for it, I think, that I can find, is confidence. A confident writer, and that may be a quiet beginning, but you just know in that instant that this person really knows their character. And some of my favorite short stories are by Irish writers who like William Trevor, Edna O'Brien, you know, who write about quiet lives, what we'd call ordinary people in small villages. There is no great bang to the start of the story. It might just be a woman writing down her shopping list, but it is done with such confidence as to who this person is that you're immediately drawn in. And it could be a sense of place. It could be almost the beginning of a quiet moment of transformation, but you know that it's going to be built on and that it's going to turn into something really quite big.
a lot of that, as you said, is to do with voice, isn't it? that there's something in the sounds that this person makes that draws you in. And I think one of the reasons why writing advice has become a little bit obsessed with openings and grabbing people is that, you know, there's such a wide variety of literary magazines and short story competitions, and quite often, seeing it from the sort of back end, you know, there's 820 short stories there. Someone's being paid about £20 to be the first reader, you know, before you get the short list or something like that. And they just going, am I going to read this 10-page story? You know, because, and in some ways, you know, if it doesn't grab you in the first page, you've already kind of about, you know, a seventh of your story's gone. Then I find that, you know, quite often there's a long list of great stories that would have won. So if that first page isn't great, you know, so I think that's where that pressure comes from.
There's a game that I play when I'm at an artist residency of some kind that you probably know about, where you take a novel or a book of short stories no one's heard of, they don't know the plot, and everyone writes down a plausible first line, and among them is the actual first line, and everyone votes on what they think the real first line is. And what I find is that writers are terrible at this game, because they try to write these elaborate, incredible sentences that contain worlds, and the best are composers, because they write lines like, the train wouldn't arrive until 11:30, period, which is kind of how a lot of things begin much more quietly.
Would you like to read a little bit from the beginning of your novel?
Yeah.
Thank you.
This is Mahesh's copy.
Signed. I'm very excited.
What if I read, is it too much to read this whole paragraph? I'm going to read the whole paragraph. I'm sorry. From where I sit, the story of Arthur Less is not so bad. Look at him, seated primly in the hotel lobby's plush round sofa, blue suit and white shirt, legs knee-crossed so that one polished loafer hangs free of its heel. The pose of a young man. His slim shadow is, in fact, still that of his younger self, but at nearly 50, he's like those bronze statues in public parks that, despite one lucky knee rubbed raw by school children, discolor beautifully until they match the trees. So has Arthur Less, once pink and gold with youth, faded like the sofa he sits on, tapping one finger on his knee and staring at the grandfather clock. The long patrician nose perennially burned by the sun, even in cloudy New York October, the washed-out blonde hair too long on the top, too short on the sides, portrait of his grandfather, those same watery blue eyes. Listen, you might hear anxiety ticking, ticking, ticking away, and he stares at that clock, which unfortunately is not ticking itself. It stopped 15 years ago. Arthur Less is not aware of this. He still believes at his ripe age that escorts for literary events arrive on time and bellboys reliably wind the lobby clocks. He wears no watch. His faith is fast. It is mere coincidence that the clock stopped at 6:30, almost exactly the hour when he is to be taken to tonight's event. The poor man does not know it, but the time is already 7:15.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you, what's that impulse that makes you start something new, that makes you begin? You know?
Me or
yeah.
everyone?
We'll start with you, and then we're going to ask after each reading. So.
It's hard because I'm starting something new. Ooh. But I can't tell you what the impulse, if it's compulsion or vanity or some introverted spark, it's hard to say because I know it's going to transform into something else. That's the problem. It's an emotional need for an inner life, without which my inner life is filled with, television shows I'm watching, and instead I'd rather have it filled with this story.
And do you find, is there, some people would say it's an image comes into their heads, or they've heard a bit of dialogue, or are there certain sort of
weirdly,
inspirations, or?
I know the end of the book first. That's the first thing I know, which I think is very strange.
Yeah, it is. Well, maybe we'll find out. We're going to talk about endings a little bit later, so I'll ask you more about that. Would you like to read a little bit for us? Thank you.
So this is two kinds of beginnings. It's the beginning of a story. It's also the the first story in the book, A Day in the Life, which is the latest book I've published, a collection of stories. It's called The Stranger. There were no new ideas to be found in the city, so I retired last year to this small town. An experiment to see if I could live in a house with a tiled roof that sometimes leaked and little storybook windows that muffled rather than let in light. 4 months straight, it rained with pounding urgency, book ended by 2 of drizzle. Sentences that I thought had no currency anymore, not in the 21st century, still applied here in this drenched hill town. It was a dark and stormy night. Or, the wind howled in the trees and rattled the window panes. One could imagine a very old place, a sparser and hardier monsoon existence hidden in the folds of the green valleys, even though they'd been killing off the vestiges in recent years, building hotels over the Christian graveyards and glassy shopping complexes where there'd been trees and empty space. Still, a few bungalows with compounds and driveways from 100 years ago remained. With the rain and the daily power cuts, the Gothic mist creeping over everything all the time in the season, and the silence that lay over the hedgerows in the lanes away from the town center, this was still a place where you could play at being someone else.
Thank you. And what about you? Do you recognize, is there a familiar way that you start, a feeling, or can you talk us through a little bit?
I like what you said about things being in your head for 20 years, maybe, before you actually put them down. And I think that's the kind of writer I am too. Except in those 20 years, there may be a million things, a million possible seeds, and only some of them will bear fruit. So it's like being in this dream state. It's like that W.B. Yeats line, "In dreams begin responsibilities." So some of the things you dream about become responsibilities in that sense. You feel responsible for those dreams. And in some interview or the other, someone was asking me how possibilities turn into realities where fiction writing is concerned, and I said it's a bit like being a windmill. You're taking the elements and you're churning them out into something useful. So I feel like I have this sort of antenna, and it is very much scraps of things. It's like a conversation you hear on a bus, or a face, or a scent of something. I mean, it's really could be anything that could be a beginning. I don't begin with the idea of a story as plot. I begin with an impulse. And that impulse could come from dreams, it could come from, so when I say dreams, it's more the state of being attuned to the world in a particular way, so that world is always offering possibilities, and then some of those possibilities may become stories if you follow them through.
You'd said in your introduction there that this was almost 2 beginnings, because it was the beginning of your collection as well. It just made me think, when you chose this story to begin your collection, was there a thought process behind that as well?
Yes, because it's a very grumpy man, and my book is full of grumpy men. This one is particularly grumpy. But my characters tend to be at odds with the world, solitary, brooding, a lot of interior life, close third person, so they are, it's almost first person, but it's not. So I think it is typical, this story in some ways, of the collection, and I thought it was a nicely melancholic way to begin somewhat broody, melancholic book of stories.
All right, thank you very much. Would you like to read for a little bit for us? Thank you.
This is the first paragraph opening of my story, No Presents Please. This is the title of the book also, No Presents Please. And this is the last story in the book, contrary to, The half-finished Ghatkopar flyover looked like a bridge that had been bombed. The iron spikes of the columns between the unfinished stretches on either side of the road seemed to be piercing the sky, which could be seen trapped in between. Below, the vehicles crawled their way through the construction rubble and slowly disappeared. This was the fate of all roads. A man could stop wherever he wanted, but the road? By the side of such a road, holding a large album wrapped in a plastic, 22-year-old Popat stands, distraught. His fiancée, Asavari Lokhande, who works in the ballpen factory on the opposite side of the road, is about to appear on a 1-hour break. In the album are samples of wedding invitations, blank invitations. He has borrowed them from a friend who works in a printing press. Popat and Asavari have to choose one of them from these samples and give the card for printing today in anticipation of their wedding. That's why Popat is here. Asavari was never late. As the cloud of cement dust from 2 passing trucks settled, she emerged from it as if in a dream sequence from a film, waving her hand. Her hair was so tightly tied in a bun that no truck's slipstream could loosen it. Her eyes were sparkling, quite unaffected by the dust. Popat held up the album for her to see, looked to the either side of the road, and dashed across the road as though he was swimming, clutching the album to his chest.
Thank you very much. I know you've already said that you write in order to know, but there must be something that brings you to that page. I mean, or do you just literally come to a blank page and think something will come out? But or is there just one thing, an image or a person or something that comes to mind first?
Yeah, it's that one context. I can see a place. I can see physically a place. I can see a context. Literally, I wait in front of a blank page. I just wait, I pause, I wait for minutes. I go back, have coffee, come back. It's like fishing. It's like fishing. It's like fishing. So then I get that particular context in front. I can see it, and it's very real to me. And as Anjum was telling, we are, as writers, all of us are faced with some questions from readers. What you write is real, or based on real, or inspired from real? What is real? I think for a writer, whatever he writes is real. It's very real to me. I remember, I will tell you an anecdote with another senior writer, same Yashwant Chittal. So once I had gone to his place in Bombay. I was stuck in a place called Dadar. I was getting delayed. So I went home, I said, I'm sorry, I was stuck in traffic in Dadar. He said, oh, Dadar. I feel very sad when I hear about Dadar, that name. I thought his pocket might have picked that, but it's a very crowded place. Maybe he might have had some bad experience in Dadar. I said, why? Then he said, no. My Nirmala died in Dadar, he said. Who is this Nirmala? I know all of his relatives. It's a character from one of his novels. See, the story is not over. Then I remembered the novel. Then I remember that in novel, Nirmala dies in Karwar. That's another place. But she had not died in Dadar. I said, she dies in Karwar, not in Dadar. Then he says, no. I was coming from Hyderabad. I was coming in a train. I was writing the last chapter. When she committed suicide, I looked out. It was Dadar. See, he is responsible for her death, actually. And he is now mourning for that death. And Dadar, which is a physical place where he wrote the story, is so real to him. So, for a writer, what he writes is very, very real. I mean, for all of us. So that's why that question, when it comes, whether it is real or inspired from real, whether you write based on reality, this surpasses all those things. So for me, one scene, maybe I'm driven by films. I'm a big film buff. I love cinema. So whatever I see is always a scene in front of my eyes, and I just follow it.
Yeah. Before we get you to read, actually, just come following on that point. And, I mean, it's a question I hear at nearly every literary event when it comes to the audience. How much of you is in the book? Or is it, I think particularly when you write in first person, and quite a lot of short stories are in first person, people think that it's about you. Do you get those kind of questions a lot? And how much of you is in your work? Does anyone want to answer that before we move on?
My cover looks like this, so people ask me all the time, and here's a blonde man around even the thing I described. I realize I'm like, it kind of sounds like me right now with my legs crossed, so I get it. I used quite a lot of literary event stuff in the book, so yeah, of course it's about me. And then he's not me.
Yeah.
My mother, I keep telling her, these things did not happen to these people.
Yeah. And you don't think that they're real? Like in this case of this writer who's the friend who thought that these characters, that these things had actually happened? Have you ever had anything? Ever got confused with your own reality?
There is a danger in doing lit fests and being a public person as a writer, because then people know some of the details, if not all of the details of your biography, and then they match that with what is going on in your fiction. Whereas if we were more anonymous, they couldn't do that. I mean, I write about the cities I live in. My first novel was set in Shillong, and it was a lot of people it's a smallish city. And while I did fictionalize and dramatize and camouflage, there were people saying, oh, I know. And there's never any doubt about it. There's such a sense of conviction. Yeah. Oh, I know that character who is blah, blah, blah in your novel. And I'm like, how do you know? Because I'm not sure it was entirely that person. But yes, there may have been an element of it. So the real is always present, I think. And certainly in my case, I think I'm interested not so much in actual people, actual events, as much as the real as in the contemporary. What is going on now in our society, in that sense real. So it should be recognizable as something, oh yeah, I know I recognize this, rather than I know this is Andrew in this book, or I know this is Anjum in this book, as I know this is what it feels like to be in Bangalore now, or in Shillong now.
I have 5 sisters, and they've all individually, privately come up and said, I know that's me. And I said, well, just don't tell the rest, because they'll be really hurt. So
I had a similar experience to Anjum, actually, because my first novel was set in Mysore, where I live, again, a small place. And I did my first event there just after it had come out. And later, a friend said to me that someone had approached them about the reading I'd done and said, that's me, I know it's me. And the reading had ended at a particular point where you knew something else was going to happen. And he said, I have to find out what else he said about me, with this sense of panic, as if this was someone I really didn't know very well at all. So it's interesting in that impulse to see yourself, to be convinced that someone is absolutely compelled to reveal all your secrets. And perhaps writers are just instinctively untrustworthy people. So there is this suspicion that this person is going to use your life and hang it out to dry, So yeah, it's certainly something I've seen. But in terms of using my own life, I shy away from that a lot. And in fact, one of the stories in this collection is told from the point of view of a 10-year-old boy. And it was the story that I found the most difficult, even though I have been a 10-year-old boy. But the voice just didn't come. And it's sometimes easier to throw yourself into the voice of someone else, but where it comes to drawing on your own experiences, I've found there are blockages because you're hesitant about what you want to reveal.
Could you read a beginning for us?
So this is not that story. This is another story. I'll tell you about how it came about after I've read the first couple of paragraphs. It's called The Agony of Leaves. I do not want to beat about this bush or that bush. I will say it straight. I am not a perverted fellow. It has never been my habit to move with prostitutes or other women of that type. Not even once have I made a lewd remark to a lady or suggested some dubious act to anyone other than my wife. I was always faithful to Latha, and she will certainly vouch for that wherever she's resting now. I am from a decent family. I have a good position in the community. I have clean hands. Unfortunately for me, I'm in love with my daughter-in-law. And without a doubt, it is love. It is necessary to say this to challenge the obvious conclusion that my predicament is a matter of lust and libido. The problem is society, which over and above everything else has a filthy mind. People will say, look at the dirty bugger, he has no shame. How could he even think such a thing? What I would say in response is this: look at my track record and my intentions. Look at my character. After such an examination, only a clean chit can be the result. But it is my bad luck that things are not so simple.
Thank you. You said you were going to tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
that.
so there were two things that sparked this story. One is reality. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time having deep musings. I really need sort of concrete things to latch onto, which spark stories. And this was an anecdote told to me, which involved sort of a very distant, extended part of my family. And so in India, it's still quite common, especially outside the big cities, to have the joint family system where, you know, the patriarch or the matriarch of the family, all the brothers, their wives, their children, all living under one roof. And so this was the setup in one particular house. And what had happened is that one of the daughters-in-law had accused her father-in-law of peeking at her in the bathroom while she was showering every morning. She'd long suspected that he pulled up a stool and was looking at her through the window above the door. And she came out with this and, you know, accused him of it publicly in front of the rest of the family. And it completely split the family. One half believed her and said, oh, I've always thought he was a dirty old man, and, you know, I've never liked that look in his eye. And then the other half thought, oh, well, I've never liked her. She's always been a shameless hussy. She's just doing this for attention. And it completely split the family. And I kind of got a little bit obsessed with this story because I thought this must happen all the time. There are still so many instances of joint families living together, and it must be very, very easy for an older man to experience kindness from a younger woman, or, you know, some kind of solicitous behavior, and to easily mistake that for love or lust or something in that region. So that was one part of the obsession that led to this story. The other part was I was walking in Kunur in the Nilgiri Hills, which is tea country. There's a lot of tea grown there. And I was walking past a tea factory, and I found a brochure on just by the gate, which I just picked up. Someone had left it there. And it was a glossary of tea terms in the tea industry. And one of the things listed on the brochure was the agony of leaves. And this is the action of the leaves when you pour boiling water onto them. So that swirling kind of metamorphosis as they are unsettled by the hot water, that in their industry is called the agony of leaves.
Beautiful.
And yeah, it was something that really jumped out at me. So it was sort of the marrying of these two things that happened around the same time, you know, that led to this story. And so I think reality is always there, but it's that spark, it's that ignition, and you don't know where it's going to take you.
Wonderful, thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, Andrew, we're often going to creative writing workshops and reading lots of writers' tips and things that I do for work, and I hear this phrase a lot, which I actually find very useful, that the ending should be an inevitable surprise. Have you heard this? Is this something that resonates with your work?
I mean, I haven't heard it. I've been reading the Twitter 10 writing tips thing at all, because that sounds terrifying to me. That sounds great for me because I always know the ending. So I'm not, it's not something that I have to, I don't know where I'm going. So I try to, in fact, with this book, my editor wanted me to cut the ending because she said,
What?
She said, oh, it'll just be too much of a surprise and people have already enjoyed the book and you don't want to lose them. And I said, I hear what you're saying. I'll just change the entire rest of the book. Because the ending is what they leave
You were writing
with.
towards that.
Yeah, I was writing towards that the whole time. So I said, I guess I wrote it wrong. So I'll change everything else. And in fact, what I read you, it does tell you the ending of
Yeah.
the book. You just don't know it when you're reading it.
Yeah, yeah, that's exact. I think that's fantastic. And you, Anjum, do you think it's an inevitable surprise, the endings?
No, again, I don't think so, given the kind of fiction. Is this even on? Can you hear me?
Hello?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just had this sudden vision that I'm talking to myself. No, I don't think surprise matters so much to me, but some sense of closure, yes. And I often think of the distinction between open-ended and unresolved. And I think there is a difference, and I like the open-ended ending, which is that you are creating a sense of different possibilities, and you're leaving the reader wondering which one of these is likely to have happened, but you don't know. But you are presenting a small universe of possible endings, 3 or 5. Whereas unresolved is not so good, I think. There has to be a sense of something likely to happen, even if you don't actually say, yes, this happened. So I think surprise, no, not so much, but a sense of something coming to some kind of, however liminal, however provisional, an ending, that's important to me. But I had a similar experience as Andrew's, which is one of my novels seems to end and then has a kind of an epilogue-ish second ending. And I had an editor who liked the book, and obviously liked the book because they were publishing it. And as the book was going to press, she's like, I think you could just drop the epilogue. And I had a similar thing that I'll just rewrite the whole book. Because that epilogue is so important to me. You can't just pull it out without changing the complexion of the rest of the book. I'm not going to say which novel it is and which editor it is, but it really stunned me because it seems so much like an afterthought. And I thought she has actually read the book. Maybe she hadn't read it all the way to the end.
Wow. Okay. And how do you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so happy that I'm writing in Kannada language because there is no interference from publishers or editors or nobody there. Whatever I write goes to the press. Whatever I write is taken by the readers. So I'm so happy. See, this is a very interesting point. Yeah, the end. I think the story itself drives us to a point. The experience, the entire experience which is evolved during writing, that itself takes us to a concluding kind of a point, which need not be like decisive. It can be open-ended, but this is enough. Every story has its soul, has its body in proportion. So that soul can hold only that much body. So that soul can't hold beyond that. So then it stops. I remembered in our village, Gokarna, it's a temple town in coastal Karnataka, there used to be a public library. And some notorious kids like me, their bad hobby was to tear off last pages of detective novels. You don't know who is the murderer.
Oh, they should be flogged.
Yeah. Or somebody will write on the first page, Prakash is the murderer.
I kind of love these people.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, But still we read those novels. I mean, so the ending in a very, like the detective novels or, like what you call episodic kind of story novels are different. But my way of writing is not that. So, I mean, so that's why the story decides where it has to stop. I mean, I stop, then I look, and I mean, don't mistake me because I should tell you how I write the stories. Yeah. First of all, I don't rework on my stories. And it's most of the time, most of my stories are single draft stories. And I'm not very proud about them. Sometimes it has happened that the hero's name has changed in the process because I had not gone through it again properly. People thought it was magical realism. They said, I like the way Sadanand becomes Sadashiv. So all these things happen. So that's the process. And another thing is I write with hand still. I don't type. I write with hand because I love that. I don't know why. Because when I write with hand, it looks still incomplete to me. I like that. It doesn't looks complete. When it is typed, when I write itself, it looks complete. It's over, final. Only some auditor has to sign it with his stamp. That kind of a finality, I am little uncomfortable. It's my personal fetish, perhaps. So that's how it is all about.
Well, thank you very much. And in a few minutes, we're going to open up to questions. So I'm giving you a wee warning to get your minds kind of formulating some questions for us. Mahesh, how do you feel about
I
this
still
inevitable
can't get
surprise?
over the sadism of wanting to rip out the last pages of detective novels. This is going to take me a little while to kind of bring my thoughts back. But yeah, I think there is this thing, particularly about short stories, where there is a notion of an ambiguous ending, where the reader can insert themselves, and the reader, it's a dialogue. Essentially between the reader and the writer, and I love those sorts of endings. You know, I don't find them unsatisfying. I love that there would be a recalibration depending on who's reading it and their own life experiences, where they interpret the ending. But I know not everyone feels the same way, and I've been to the Odd Book Club event where an enraged reader has approached me at the end of it and said, but what happened at the end of, like, do they do this or do they not? And you sort of say something really unsatisfactory, like, but it's up to you, you know, it's, once the book is out there, it's your book, it's your story, so what do you think happened? And, you know, she gets even more enraged because you're ducking the issue in some way.
That's what she's paying you for.
Yeah, exactly, you know, so if I could have done this, I would have written it myself, you know. But I do like that kind of ending, and I love writers who write like that. But I've been also faced with a very different kind of dilemma with my latest book, which is a reimagining of Jane Austen's Emma, set in Delhi. And everyone knows everyone who's read it knows how Emma ends. Everyone knows that Emma and Mr. Knightley get together.
What? But they haven't... You've just done what he said. They didn't know.
So this is a great challenge to, well, everyone always gets together in Jane Austen novels. I mean, I don't think that's any great secret. So this was the huge challenge. How do you make an ending that actually still surprises and engages people with a book that is so beloved, that has been read by generations as part of the canon? And it was a huge challenge that, you know, you do spend a lot of time, and it's only because I knew how it would end that I began the project at all, because I think, like you were saying, you worked towards something, but I think this would have failed entirely if the ending was just a retreading of Jane Austen's novel, you know. So yeah, the ending can sometimes be the first thing. The ending can be the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about you write to discover what's going to happen, and I definitely have a destination in mind, particularly with the novel. I know someone described, I think it was E.L. Doctor or something, say, you know, oh, you only need to see as far as the headlights at night, you know, and just see what happens. But my argument is, you know, but where are you going in your car? You're not driving out for no reason. So you know you're going to, you know, New York or wherever you're driving to. So even though you can only see that far, you have a destination in mind and a route. And so I definitely need that confidence. And just the final question before I open up was, the other thing I do is when I'm finished, when I get to the end, I go back and rewrite the beginning. And I just wonder, do you do that? And I guess it's back to that inevitable surprise, or back to that sort of, you know, just making sure that the ending is already there, that it's already set up right.
Yeah,
right
I mean, I write, that's the last thing I write, I mean, I've already written the beginning, but I go back and realize it's terrible.
Yeah.
So I revise it and usually have to shorten it because I've clawed through, even in this one, you can see me trying to be like, it's a man, he's 50, he's in New York in October. You know, there's all this technical crap I'm trying to get done.
Yeah. Do you go back and rewrite your beginnings when you're finished?
Well, I go back and rewrite everything.
Yeah, I mean,
partly
but
because it
specifically
might be the situation that Jayant just described, which is that your character's name has changed and all the biographical details are all inconsistent. So there is a way in which an ending is a beginning, simply because it signals that it now is the time when you actually have something down that is the start of what is eventually going to be the finished product. So I think in that sense, the whole book is provisional till you're actually at the end, and then you start all over again.
Do you ever go back and
Yeah,
rewrite?
unfortunately, off late I am doing it because I think maybe I'm aging. So opening pages look bit tentative. I mean, like there's some, still probing is on. So after finishing a story, I recently, a couple of stories in last 2-3 years, which I have written, I've gone back and changed the first paragraph, first page, and since I write with hand, make it look good looking. So that I do.
Yeah.
And one thing that we were talking in the previous round about the self, how much of self in a
Yes,
story.
yes.
I wanted to say something which I forgot. See, once I won a prize for one of my stories. Very interesting prize, nice prize. So I had gone
Won a
to
lot of prizes.
Yeah, I won a prize. Yeah. So I went to a senior writer, same Yashwant Chittal, who talked about that death and this thing. He's my mentor, so I keep referring to him. So he was very excited about the story. He appreciated me, congratulated me. Then he said, Jayant, remember one thing. Your story has won the prize, not you. Oh, that's a beautiful thing. I like that. That has set me, this has happened 30 years ago. He said it's the story which has won the prize, and story has emerged in spite of you. Okay, you initiated, but so many things have happened through it. Collective mind is there, this is there, wishful thinking, everything comes through. So you also be distant and try to understand why it won it. So it was such a good thing. Next year I didn't win the prize. I didn't feel sad at all because I didn't lose. My story lost it.
Ah, yeah, okay. As long as you got the check, that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Anjum. I think we're constantly rewriting once
Yeah.
we know, because the dust has sort of settled and we can see everything better now. So we return and make sure everything is in sync. And in fact, I'm still rewriting. I mean, there are times when even after it's
Oh, yeah.
published, you're kind of, you do a public reading or something and you suddenly wince.
And you cringe.
Yeah, you cringe and you think, oh God, I can't believe
I hate that.
I did this. So you're still constantly, if you happen to revisit a work, you're still rewriting, you're still kind of trying to finesse something and filled with regrets usually. So.
Yeah, okay. Questions? Oh, we've got one right here at the front. Thank you.
Your last question sort of preempted my question.
Oh, I know.
I wanted to ask whether you write the beginning at the end or at the beginning or at the end, and the end at the beginning or at the end. So my question now would be, I presume from your answers that most of you keep redrafting. In which case, the final version, is it close to the original or is it radically different at the end of the writing?
Anyone like to take that?
Ask. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if I got you right. Are you asking if the final product?
No, the final version of the beginning and the ending, if you have already prepared right at the beginning, is it radically different from what you had initially thought of?
Yeah, I think for me, first sentences are very important. They are not just giving information. They are doing a lot of work of setting the tone, introducing the reader to my style, and like I said, I like there to be a sense that a lot has happened already and you are coming into this story somewhere in the middle or at some point during a larger process. So I don't usually tinker with my first sentence or couple of sentences. Those are talismanic for me. They have a talismanic quality, which usually I stay with. Everything else changes, even the ending.
I think it's important to point out what you said before, that it's the way it's told, the language that's used, probably the same things have happened, but that there's a way you feel like the ending's too sentimental, so you pull back in the language, but not in what happens.
What actually happens, absolutely. Yeah.
Any thoughts, you guys?
Just in my experience, the beginnings and the endings, I feel I'm generally sort of okay on. They're not radically changed, but it's everything else in the middle, you know. And I mentioned the story about the 10-year-old boy, and I can't tell you how many endless back and forth drafts went back and forth between Mahesh Rao and me, and still not the voice of a 10-year-old boy, still too adult, and so yeah, I mean, I think sometimes it's everything else but the beginning and the end.
Next session's on the middle. You have to come back. You have to come back for that.
I remember my mother, who had a habit of reading the last page first. Any news story, first she will see the last few pages first, because she wants to know who dies, who doesn't.
Someone like
yeah. I mean, then she's happy and then she goes back. So we should not take readers for granted also. Every reader has a different way of reading. Even when a collection of stories is there, we think he will read the first story first. No, he will read the shortest story first. See, that's
they're annoying, aren't they?
Yeah.
Don't do what we want them to do. All right, thank you. Sorry?
Me?
Yeah, the mic.
Sorry.
Yeah, you've got the mic.
All right, so a famous librarian named Nancy Pearl. She has her own action figure. It does amazing shushing action. She says a reader enters a story through one of 4 windows, and she describes the windows as story, setting, character, or language. And I would say, I'm going to guess that, Andrew, you are probably character, you are setting, you are story, and you are language. Could you each tell us how you most often
you know
enter?
What? Again, I'm going to make a guess that we're all language. Yeah. Like, I bet it's the way that photographers only think about light, they never think about the things they're taking pictures of, that when I talk with writers, we usually talk about words. And now, they may disagree with me and may enter through setting, but I would say that the language is how you decide how you're going to tell the story. So the beginning, you set up the voice and the tone and the expectation.
But I think there's a 5th thing, which is an intangible thing, and I am very reluctant to break it down only into these 4, because I think all 4 come together to create something we don't quite have a word for, which is why, and we never can actually crack it, which is why we keep reading. Maybe it's atmosphere, maybe it's heart, I don't know what it is, but I don't think you can easily or so neatly break down a piece of fiction into only language, setting, character, and what was the 4th thing? Story.
With respect to Nancy Pearl, who I'm a great admirer
Absolutely,
of.
but I would like to stay always one step ahead of anyone who thinks they've cracked it.
Or charm, maybe that's how I enter this story.
Heart, something intangible.
A question over here, please. Yes?
Hi, good morning. So if you start a story in first person, and as you go along, you realize that the protagonist is leading the story, and a third person sounds better. How do you go along? Like, do you go back and, do it everything in first person? I'm always confused if I should go first person or third person.
Mahesh, do you want to?
I think sometimes writing is like acting. I mean, I've not acted since school, but it's kind of throwing yourself into the character. And the thing with first person is it's got to sound absolutely right. It's got to be genuine, because I think any reader will always find out when it slips, when it's not quite right. So if you feel like you really know this person inside out, that you're inhabiting every niche of their persona, that to me is a signal that this is going to lend itself really well to a first-person narrative. But when I feel that there is an authorial distance, or when I want to have an authorial distance, more of an observational kind of story where I want to have my own voice, which won't be confused with the characters' voices, then I think, you know, especially if I want a kind of a panorama, that's the sort of thing I'd go for. But it's just very instinctual as well. It's so hard to pin down and to even teach. You kind of feel your way around, and I think all of us, I'm sure, at some point we've started out one way and then gone back to the other way and then gone back, and you know that happens all the one. I mean, the one thing that I do have a lot of trouble with reading and writing is the second person. You know, and I judged a short story competition recently, and I think a lot of writers think that if they write in the second person, they'll solve this problem, and also that their story will stand out and it'll be edgy and, you know, different, and it'll really capture judges' attentions or editors' attentions, except that everyone is doing it. So I have read so many stories in the second person to the point where I almost feel like I can't read even a good second person narrative anymore. I just feel like I'm being hectored. You did this, and then you did this, and then you did this, and you know. So I think you really have to feel your way around with it and play around with it a lot.
Great. Time for a couple of quick questions. This lady here. And
hi, thank you. Mr. McVeigh, just one remark. The salt in your hair on the screen rather glitters. So I think Mr. Greer would appreciate that.
My hair's glittering?
Yes.
It's
on the screen.
He's gone gray.
It's 50.
Yeah,
What happens
no,
when
that's
you're
no
50?
problem. I thought Mr. Greer would appreciate that description. So there's that, and my question is to Mr. Kaikini. Forgive my ignorance about the Kannada publishing industry, but you said that you directly send your story a single draft to the press. So how does that work? And if the other panelists could talk about how much editorial intervention finally culminates in your book. I mean, how different is the final published book from the first draft, and how much of that difference is because of editorial intervention rather than your own thinking? Oh wait, what I wrote wasn't good enough, so let me just rework that.
I mean, it's a huge topic there. And
Sorry.
No. I mean, it's a great question. I mean, we are trying to talk about beginnings and endings, but maybe very quickly we could just mention the editing process.
Yeah, I think most of the regional language, whether it's the Marathi, Kannada, Tamil, Bengali, maybe, I think it's the writer writes and he just sends it across. I mean, maybe he might show it to his few friends or his dear friends who will read and give him opinion. And it works. That's how it has been working. Even novels, big fiction, short fiction, poetry. So whatever you write, and you are the ultimate decider for it. You are the critical insider. So, and you send it. And that's how it has been happening, and I think it's good. I mean, there is nothing, nothing has gone wrong with that.
I mean, you're talking about having the experience of someone saying, change the end or take the ending off. That's quite horrific. That's quite extreme, or it sounds it to me.
Maybe I should contrast that with something a little more productive, which is that I think that writing is a conversation, and it's important to have an editor who reads your work and has strong critical opinions on it and is doing that, putting forward those opinions and that criticism with the best intentions and with a love for the book. And I have also benefited from editors like that. I don't think I could ever publish a book without having a conversation with an editor about it first. So I do think it's very, very important for an editor to be there with you. You don't have to agree with everything she says, but to just be able to judge and have that conversation and say, okay, I'll take this, I won't take this, but I see where you're coming from. I think that's invaluable. I would really not at all say that all editorial intervention is interference. I don't see it that way at all.
I think quickly, one great piece of advice my friend Daniel Handler gave to me was to remind me that the editor is the patient and you are the doctor. That they can tell you where it hurts, but they're going to be like, my arm aches, I bet it's arm cancer. And you're like, there's no such thing as arm cancer. I'm the doctor. I will tell you what's going to fix it. That you actually have the responsibility to find the solution. And you cannot we're lazy and we want them to tell us what to do, but they don't know. They have no degree in that.
Okay. Very, very quick one last question. We've only got about a minute left, so.
Good morning, and thank you for a delightful discussion. So what I wanted to ask is that as writers, how important do you think a sense of closure is for you as individuals? Or even after you ostensibly finish writing, is your engagement with what you've written a continuous process?
Anyone want to take that, Jayant? Anyone else?
I think there's two things. There's one is closure as a writer, and one is closure as a reader. So as a reader, I mean, I like books that don't end when you close the last page. You know, there's an echo in your head over days, weeks, months, years sometimes, and they come back to you at odd hours in the middle of the night. And I think we've all read books that do that. But as a writer, I mean, I think, for me, like, I'm so done with the book when, you know, after the umpteenth edit, the proofreading, you know, I think it's wonderful to just draw a line and move on to the next thing.
Yeah, I think sometimes we don't even remember what the book is anymore. There's parts that we cut out and things we added. And because we don't read it again after the final go-through. And my final go-through, I read it for corrections and I read it backwards, from the last sentence to the first. It's so boring. I read it backwards so I don't get caught up in the plot or anything. It's just sentences. Oh, it's so boring. And it's also the last time I'll ever read it is backwards, so I really feel done then.
All right, well, listen, thank you so much. This panel, can we give them a round of applause? And thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you, Paul.
Enjoy your day.